So, first, I'm going to talk about a concept that some of you might not have heard of before, and it's known as racial battle fatigue or RBF. So, this term can be defined as the mental, emotional, and physical exhaustion students of color experience from constantly using cognitive energy to fight racially unsupportive or traumatic environments. In another way, it's essentially the stress that one feels from constantly having to navigate racially traumatic environments. For example, living in the US, where there are high rates of crime and high rates of trauma inflicted upon communities of color and students of color, or also on a college campus where you might face a lot of racism, discrimination, and other forms of oppression. So, common causes of racial battle fatigue are personal experiences. So, a professor or a student seeing you as being uncredible or questioning why you're in the course or in graduate school or having doubts about your ability to progress in the program. This can also be vicarious, right? So you might experience, or you might not personally experience the traumatic event, but you might witness it, right? So that can be, another student having a negative experience right in front of you, or it can be something that you see on TV, something that you hear about, or something that, gets passed along on campus, right? So again, vicarious, where it's witnessing it. Discussing events is another way that RBF manifests itself. So, in the same way that you witness an event, you might then later discuss that event with somebody else. And that in itself might bring up those same feelings of trauma or just stress response. And then very much related to vicarious is, seeing different images, video, or other content, oftentimes either in a class that might be covering a very touchy topic that day, or on social media where those images might be prevalent. In terms of outcomes for RBF, there are many: anger, frustration, anxiety, resentment, hopelessness, helplessness, fear. And all of these things lead to an increased mental health concerns and decreased academic performance. So it's really, really important, to highlight this term and to make sure that we're paying attention as students of color, particularly for students of color who are at predominantly white institutions or PWIs. Now I'm going to talk about a term that you might be more familiar with, which is microaggressions. And so these are the everyday slights or insults that one might experience related to race, gender, sexual orientation, and other identity aspects that we hold.
I want to address a common misconception about the word microaggression. So, oftentimes people note the micro in the word and assume it's supposed to mean small or insignificant. However, the micro and microaggression is compared to larger systemic issues in society, such as wealth inequality, racial injustice, healthcare, the law system, other systems that are large and that impact every facet of our lives, right? So the microaggression is compared to those larger systemic factors. It does not mean that the slights that you might experience every day are small or insignificant. In fact, many of those are quite impactful and have a negative impact on our mental and emotional and academic well-being.
So these can be verbal, right? Such as, oh, you're really smart for a Black man. Or they can be behavioral, someone, shifting away from you when you're walking down the street. They can be environmental, right? When we think about the structures in which we reside, right? When we think about the paintings or the pictures of people who are on the walls in some of the classrooms we're in or in the buildings we're in that don't have people of color. And these can be intentional, these can be unintentional. But again, these are things that can happen every single day and sometimes multiple times a day. And so next, I'm going to talk about microaggression residue, right? So these are the things that we're left with after experiencing microaggressions. And so a lot of these are thoughts that we might have. Right? So did what I think happened really happen? Right? Did they mean that, what they said? Should I confront them or should I just leave it alone? How will I prove what happened? What will I say or what will happen next? And there's a range of emotions that we might feel depending on how we responded to the situation. There might be guilt, shame, or anger in just experiencing the microaggression and or in our response to the microaggression. And we also might feel gaslit, right? So people basically pretending that what happened didn't happen. So when responding to microaggressions, there are several possibilities. Here I'm going to highlight two. So the first is to not respond and utilize self-care or coping strategies we talked about in the mental health segment. And thinking about not responding, something that I do want to make note of is that as people of color, we might feel a pull to intervene when we see microaggressions happen or other forms of oppression happen, right? That's very natural, that's very normal pull for us to want to respond and to address that. However, I'll speak from personal experience that over time, doing this, right, at every microaggression or every slight that happens might leave us feeling exhausted, might leave us feeling depleted, right? And so I think it's incredibly important that we know that it is not our job to say something and speak up every single time. And that leads right into the possible response two. If you do decide to say something, first you want to respond, and then again, go back to utilizing that self care and those coping strategies. So this is a multi-step process. So first, you're going to want to consider the context, right? Where you are, who's involved, what was the microaggression or other slight that happened. Next, you want to focus on prioritizing your safety and well-being. Above everything, right? We want to make sure that you are safe and you are okay. So in some situations, there may be actual possibility of harm to you if you were to respond and engage with somebody, right? And so again, we really want you to prioritize your safety and well-being, which is why sometimes, response one might make more sense. You also might want to seek clarification, right? So if you're unclear what someone was alluding to or talking about, you might want some additional information to help clear up that ambiguity on your part if there is any. Next, you're going to want to express your feelings and experiences, right? Tell them if how you felt, angry, sad, frustrated, hurt. Next, you're going to want to challenge the assumptions, biases, and stereotypes that individuals might put at you. And then again, lastly, you want to utilize the self-care and the coping strategies to make sure that you process the situation and get to a place that you're not internalizing that negativity and having it impact the rest of your academics or the rest of your day. I'm going to spend a little bit more talking about responding considerations. First, we want to talk about the power differentiations. So it's much harder to have these conversations and to confront microaggressions when we're talking to someone who is in a position above us, such as an advisor, a mentor, a professor, a supervisor. And because they have evaluative power over us, some of them might have a big impact on our future. All of these things are important to consider about how or when to address situations. You also want to think about the relationship with that individual. How close are you to them? Do you have to work with them in the future? who else might be impacted by this situation. And then lastly, we want to think about the consequences and ramifications. Is this going to lead to a situation where you might be unsafe, or it's going to negatively impact your career, or it's going to negatively impact your ability to progress in the program? All of these things are going to be really, really important and help us decide whether or not it's safe or we feel comfortable addressing issues as they arise. And then lastly, I want to highlight active healing and empowerment techniques. So these are things that we can engage in to combat the racist and oppressive systems we find ourselves in. So community engagement and volunteering. So research shows that when we're engaged in our community, whether that be in the larger university community, and or volunteering our time, right, into organizations or to serve populations that we care about, these things are going to help us feel a sense of empowerment, but also again push a lot of our values forward. That goes hand in hand with activism, right? So being able to stand up for what we believe in, being able to stand up for those within our communities, being able to, make the changes that we want to see. Organizational membership, again, whether that be nationally, at the school level, within the community, right? Making sure that we're part of organizations that are aligned with our values and are doing the work that we want. Donating, whether that be time, money, other resources, or skills, something that you can do is donate. And then lastly, intentional rest as a form of radical resistance. Right. So again, we might feel a pull to constantly be advocating, to constantly be engaged in activism or combating racist experiences, right? But another thing that we can do is rest. Take a nap, get a good night's sleep, right? This is also a form of resistance to take care of ourselves and to make sure that we are doing well.